A cadet mocked her scars, then froze when the four-star general said her call sign. At Fort Braxton, a quiet officer with a scarred body tries to stay invisible. But when a cocky cadet, backed by power and politics, publicly humiliates her, no one dares to speak up. What he doesn't know is that the woman he's mocking once stood alone against a battlefield of enemies and survived. She's not just any officer. She's a ghost from the most classified mission in modern history. And when the general walks in and calls her by that name, the entire room goes silent. Who is she, really? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Lieutenant Teresa Torres sat at her desk in the intelligence wing of Fort Braxton, her fingers moving steadily across the keyboard as she analyzed satellite data. The quiet hum of computers filled the air, a sound as familiar to her now as the whistle of desert winds had once been. She felt rather than saw another analyst take a wide berth around her desk. It was a dance she knew well, the careful way people avoided looking directly at the scars that ran from her left temple to her jawline. The marks were like a roadmap of that day 3 years ago, each ridge and valley telling its own story of shrapnel and survival. The morning light filtered through the high windows, casting shadows across her monitor. Teresa adjusted her position, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. Her work was meticulous, each report detailed and precise. It was one of the reasons her superiors kept her here, even if they never quite knew how to interact with her. "Good analysis on the Kerman region, Lieutenant," Colonel Matthews said as he passed by, his eyes fixed on the folder in his hands. He was one of the few who addressed her directly, though always with that same professional distance. "Thank you, sir," Teresa replied quietly, her voice carrying just far enough to be heard. She had learned to modulate her voice carefully, to exist in the spaces between conversation and silence. The intelligence wing buzzed with its usual activity, analysts discussing data points, supervisors making their rounds, the occasional burst of laughter from the break room. Teresa remained in her corner, separate from it all. Her isolation wasn't forced. It had evolved naturally, like water finding its lowest point. She glanced at the small mirror on her desk, not out of vanity but necessity. She had positioned it to help her avoid startling anyone approaching from her blind spot. In its reflection, she caught a glimpse of her scars, silvery in the fluorescent light. They were a constant reminder of the classified operation that had ended her field career, of the 18 hours she'd spent calling in airstrikes while Taliban forces closed in. The Medal of Honor she'd received gathered dust in a drawer at home. Some decorations were too heavy to wear. At lunch, Teresa ate at her desk, methodically working through a sandwich while reviewing intelligence reports. The break room would be full of casual conversation and careful glances. Here, at least, she could focus on her work without navigating the uncomfortable silence that followed her presence. "Torres!" a voice called out. It was Captain Rodriguez, her immediate supervisor. "Got a minute?" Teresa straightened in her chair. "Yes, sir." Rodriguez approached her desk holding a memo. Unlike others, he maintained eye contact when speaking to her, though she could see the effort it took. "There's a joint training exercise coming up next month. All departments are participating." Her heart rate quickened slightly. Joint exercises meant increased interaction, more eyes, more whispers. "Understood, sir. I'll prepare the necessary intelligence briefings." "You'll be participating directly, Lieutenant, not just support this time." Rodriguez's voice was firm, but not unkind. "Colonel's orders." Teresa's fingers tensed on her keyboard. "Sir, I'm not sure that's—" "You're still one of our most qualified tactical analysts, Torres. Medal of Honor or not, we need your expertise in the field." He set the memo on her desk. "Details are in there. Briefings tomorrow at 0900 hours. As Rodriguez walked away, Teresa stared at the memo, her scarred reflection barely visible in the darkened monitor screen. The prospect of working directly with other units made her stomach twist. She had carefully constructed her invisible life here, efficient, quiet, unremarkable, except for the scars that marked her as different. She took a deep breath, steadying herself the way she once had behind a rifle scope. The familiar mantra echoed in her mind. Survive today, worry about tomorrow later. But tomorrow was already here, wrapped in official orders that would drag her from the shadows back into the light. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of data analysis and quiet determination. As other analysts began packing up for the day, Teresa remained, finding comfort in the emptying office. The fading light cast long shadows across her desk, and in the silence she could almost pretend she was back in her sniper's nest, where solitude had been an asset rather than a burden. Finally, she gathered her things, slipping the memo into her bag. The weight of it seemed to pull at her shoulder as she walked through the parking lot, her boots making soft sounds against the pavement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new eyes to avoid, new whispers to ignore. But for now, she had her routine, her quiet apartment waiting, and the solace of another day survived. The briefing room buzzed with activity as personnel from different units filed in, their boots squeaking against the polished floor. Lieutenant Teresa Torres chose a seat near the back, hoping to blend into the institutional beige walls. She arranged her materials with precise movements, her eyes focused downward as voices and laughter filled the space around her. The door swung open with unnecessary force and a group of junior officers strode in. At their center walked Cadet Preston Blackwood III, his uniform pressed to knife-edge perfection, his bearing radiating the kind of confidence that came from knowing your father chaired the Armed Services Committee. "Quite a turnout," Preston announced loudly, surveying the room like a king inspecting his subjects. His followers, a hand-picked circle of similarly privileged young officers, laughed on cue. Though I question the necessity of pulling everyone from their natural environments. Teresa kept her head down, but she could feel Preston's presence as he moved through the room. He had a way of making space feel smaller, of turning oxygen into something thick and uncomfortable. She'd heard about him, everyone had. Senator's son, future general, if his father had anything to say about it. The kind of person who measured others not by their merit but by their pedigree. Colonel Matthews entered, calling the room to attention. As everyone settled into their seats, Teresa allowed herself to breathe a little easier. The briefing would start, and she could focus on the work, the one place she still felt whole. "This joint exercise will integrate personnel from all departments," Matthews explained, gesturing to the projected map behind him. "We're breaking down the usual barriers between units to improve operational efficiency." A hand shot up. Preston's, of course. "Sir, with all due respect, shouldn't we maintain certain professional separations? Some roles are better suited to remain in their specialized environments." Teresa felt his gaze sweep across the room and land on her. Her scars seemed to burn under his attention. "Each person here has earned their place in this exercise, Cadet Blackwood," Matthews replied firmly. "Now, moving on to the operational parameters." "Of course, sir," Preston interrupted, his voice carrying a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I just think it's important to consider morale. After all, we wouldn't want to make our civilian contacts uncomfortable. Some of our intelligence personnel might be better suited staying in their back offices where they won't disturb anyone with their damage." The word damage landed like a physical blow. Teresa's hands tightened on her notebook as scattered laughter rippled through Preston's followers. She kept her eyes fixed on the page, but the words blurred before her. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. She could feel dozens of eyes shifting between her and Preston, waiting for her response. 3 years ago, she'd faced down enemy fire without flinching. Now she sat frozen, unable to find her voice under the weight of cruel laughter and pitying glances. Colonel Matthews cleared his throat. "That's enough, Cadet. This exercise requires full participation from all personnel, no exceptions." But Preston had already achieved his goal. Teresa felt the familiar walls closing in, the carefully constructed fortress of her isolation becoming a prison. Her scars, the marks of her sacrifice, of 18 hours spent protecting her fellow soldiers, had been transformed into a joke, a reason for exclusion. She thought of her Medal of Honor still in its drawer at home, thought of the classified reports that detailed her actions that day. None of it mattered here, in this room where appearance trumped achievement, where the son of a senator could dismiss years of service with a single cruel comment. The briefing continued, but Teresa barely heard it. She took notes mechanically, her handwriting steadier than her heart. She had survived worse than this, she reminded herself. She had learned to live with the stares, the whispers, the careful avoidance. She could survive this too. But as Preston's followers continued to snicker and whisper, as other officers carefully avoided looking in her direction, Teresa felt something shift inside her. The silence she had wrapped around herself like armor suddenly felt less like protection and more like surrender. Still, she remained quiet, letting the moment pass, letting Preston believe he had won this small battle. The briefing dragged on, each minute stretching like hours. Teresa endured it all with the same stoic patience that had kept her alive in that sniper's nest 3 years ago. Sometimes, she reflected, survival meant knowing when to hold your fire. Teresa walked quickly through the corridors of Fort Braxton's intelligence wing, her footsteps echoing against the stark walls. Each step carried her further from the briefing room, but the shame and humiliation followed like a shadow. Her workspace, usually a sanctuary of order and purpose, felt different now, exposed, vulnerable. She settled into her chair, powering up her computer with trembling fingers. The familiar hum of electronics and the soft blue glow of monitors should have been comforting, but Preston's words kept replaying in her mind. Their damage. The casual cruelty of it, the way his followers had laughed, turned her stomach. Through the glass walls of her office, she caught snippets of conversation as personnel passed by. Preston's group lingered in the hallway, their voices carrying deliberately loud. "Did you see how she just sat there?" One of them snickered. "Like a statue." "Well, what do you expect?" Another voice. She recognized it as Lieutenant Parker, one of Preston's closest followers. "That's what happens when they let anyone into officer training these days." Preston's right, some people should know their place. Teresa's fingers hovered over her keyboard, trying to focus on the intelligence report in front of her. The words blurred and shifted as conversations from the hallway continued to drift in. 2 junior analysts who usually stopped by her office for guidance hurried past without looking in. Others took longer routes to avoid passing her door entirely. The invisible bubble that had always surrounded her seemed to have grown larger, more impenetrable. Through the glass, she watched Preston holding court near the water cooler, his uniform still perfectly pressed, his bearing radiating untouchable confidence. She'd heard enough about his background to understand why. Senator Blackwood's only son, groomed from birth for military leadership. His father chaired the Armed Services Committee, controlling military budgets and promotions with an iron grip. Preston had never known a world where his actions had consequences. "My father always says the military is about tradition," Preston's voice carried clearly, meant to be heard. "We can't let standards slip just because some people think scars are the same as qualification." Teresa's hand unconsciously touched her left cheek, fingers tracing the familiar ridges of scar tissue. Each mark told the story of that day. 18 hours alone in a sniper's nest, calling in airstrikes while enemy fire rained down. The classified Medal of Honor in her drawer at home meant nothing in the face of Preston's privileged disdain. Not everyone avoided her eyes, though. Master Sergeant Chen nodded respectfully as he passed, his usual greeting unchanged. Captain Rodriguez, who had served in Afghanistan during the same period as Teresa, dropped a coffee on her desk without comment, a small gesture of solidarity. But these moments of kindness only highlighted the shifting social dynamics. People who had previously maintained professional relationships now seemed uncertain how to act. The careful distance they'd kept before had transformed into something more deliberate, more obvious. Preston's voice drifted in again. "Father says the Armed Services Committee is considering some changes to officer qualification requirements. About time, really. We need to maintain certain standards of presentation." The threat was clear, even if technically powerless. Teresa knew her position was secure, her record and qualifications beyond reproach. But Preston's words were doing their damage anyway, creating an atmosphere where her presence became a topic of discussion, her scars a reason for exclusion rather than a mark of service. She opened another intelligence report, forcing herself to concentrate on threat assessments and satellite data. This was where she excelled, where her mind could lose itself in patterns and analysis. But even here, in her element, Preston's influence had reached. Junior analysts who usually sought her expertise now directed their questions to less qualified personnel, afraid that being seen with her might mark them as targets. Through it all, Teresa maintained her composure, her face a mask of professional detachment. She had survived worse, much worse. But as the day wore on, as Preston's followers grew bolder in their comments and the social isolation deepened, she felt the weight of it settling into her bones. The fortress of silence she had built around herself was becoming a prison, and Preston Blackwood held the key. The weeks following the briefing room incident brought a chill to Fort Braxton's corridors that had nothing to do with the building's air conditioning. Preston Blackwood's campaign against Teresa Torres spread like poison through the base's social fabric, growing more toxic with each passing day. "I heard she froze up in the field," Preston's voice carried across the mess hall one morning. "That's probably how she got those scars. Couldn't handle the pressure." He sat at his usual table, surrounded by his circle of admirers, speaking just loud enough to ensure his words reached nearby tables. Teresa kept her eyes fixed on her breakfast tray, but she couldn't block out the whispers that followed. The truth about her classified mission, 18 hours of continuous combat, calling in airstrikes while taking heavy fire, remained sealed in confidential files. Her Medal of Honor gathered dust in a drawer at home, unable to defend her against Preston's lies. The formal complaints started appearing on her superior's desk with clockwork regularity. Each one meticulously documented her unprofessional appearance and its supposed negative impact on unit morale. The language was carefully crafted, clearly benefiting from expensive legal consultation, the kind only a senator's son could easily access. Another complaint about Lieutenant Torres, Colonel Matthews sighed during one morning briefing. "Third one this month. Senator Blackwood's office called again, expressing concerns about maintaining appropriate military standards." The colonel's expression showed his frustration, but his hands were tied. The Armed Services Committee controlled military budgets, and Senator Blackwood wasn't subtle about wielding that power. Teresa wasn't Preston's only target. Private Sarah Chen from Communications found herself suddenly flagged for uniform violations that had never been issues before. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez received unexpected criticism about his non-standard accent during briefings. Anyone who didn't fit Preston's narrow vision of military perfection became a potential target. "My father believes strongly in maintaining the traditional character of our armed forces," Preston announced during an officers' meeting. "We can't let certain elements compromise our professional standards." His eyes flickered meaningfully toward Teresa's scars, then to Rodriguez's darker complexion, making his meaning clear. The isolation grew worse. Teresa's expertise in intelligence analysis remained unmatched, but fewer personnel dared to seek her guidance. The empty chairs at her briefings multiplied. Even casual greetings in the hallway became rare, as others feared being associated with Preston's primary target. One morning, Teresa found her office door plastered with medical discharge forms. "Just trying to be helpful," Preston smirked as he passed by. "Those scars must be affecting your psychological fitness for duty. My father knows several review board members who'd be happy to evaluate your case." The threat was clear. Preston's father didn't just control budgets, he influenced medical reviews, promotions, and transfers. The power of the Armed Services Committee reached into every corner of military life, and Preston wielded that influence like a weapon. Teresa maintained her composure, methodically removing the forms while fighting back tears of frustration. Her hands shook slightly, but she forced them steady. She wouldn't give Preston the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Lieutenant Torres?" A quiet voice interrupted her thoughts. Private Chen stood in her doorway, looking nervous but determined. "I need your help with some signal analysis, if you have time." It was a small act of defiance against Preston's unofficial boycott, and they both knew the risk Chen was taking. "Of course, Private," Teresa replied, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. "Come in." They worked together for an hour, during which Preston and two of his followers walked past repeatedly, making notes on their tablets. The next day, Private Chen was reassigned to the night shift, a classic Preston tactic for anyone who defied his unwritten rules. The pattern continued day after day. Preston's harassment became more sophisticated, always staying just within regulations, while making life increasingly difficult for his targets. His father's influence hung over the base like a storm cloud, promising consequences for anyone who challenged his son's behavior. Teresa watched it all from behind her scarred facade, documenting every incident, maintaining her professionalism even as Preston's campaign threatened to suffocate her career. She had survived worse battles, but this one tested her resolve in new ways. Each day brought fresh challenges to her dignity, her competence, and her right to serve. A war of attrition against her spirit, fought with whispers, paperwork, and the invisible power of political influence. Sergeant Major Carlos Reyes stood in the shadow of Building 312, his weathered face creased with concern as he watched another of Preston Blackwood's unofficial inspections unfold. The young cadet had cornered Private Rodriguez, nitpicking imaginary uniform violations while his followers recorded every exchange on their tablets. Carlos had seen enough. Opening his own tablet, he began documenting the incident, adding it to his growing collection of evidence. 3 weeks of systematic observation had revealed a disturbing pattern, one that went far beyond simple bullying or harassment. "That's the 4th incident today," he muttered, marking the time and location. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, adding details about Preston's body language, the specific language used, and the witnesses present. 22 years of combat experience had taught Carlos the value of detailed intelligence gathering. Later that afternoon, Carlos made his way to the base medical facility, where Dr. Amanda Chen was reviewing patient files. The psychiatrist looked up as he entered, her expression grave. "Sergeant Major," she said, closing the file she'd been reading. "I assume you're here about the situation with Cadet Blackwood?" Carlos nodded, taking a seat across from her desk. "How bad is it, Doc?" Dr. Chen removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "In the past month alone, I've had 7 soldiers request transfers citing anxiety and stress. 3 more have shown symptoms of depression. None will officially report the harassment. They're all terrified of retaliation." "Because of Senator Blackwood's influence," Carlos said. It wasn't a question. "Exactly." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "But there's more. I've noticed a pattern in who's being targeted. Lieutenant Torres isn't an isolated case. Preston seems to focus on anyone who doesn't fit his idea of what a proper military officer should look like." Carlos pulled out his tablet, sharing his observations. Hispanic soldiers, Asian personnel, women in command positions, anyone he considers undesirable faces increasing pressure to leave. "He's trying to reshape the officer corps in his own image," Dr. Chen said quietly. "I've heard him talk about maintaining standards and traditional military values, but it's just coded language for discrimination." A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Lieutenant Teresa Torres stood in the doorway, her scarred face showing surprise at finding Carlos there. "Lieutenant," Dr. Chen smiled warmly. "Please come in. We were just discussing some concerns about base morale." Teresa entered hesitantly, but Carlos could see the moment she realized she wasn't alone in her struggles. Dr. Chen shared some of the anonymous reports, careful to protect confidentiality, while revealing the broader pattern of harassment. "I thought," Teresa's voice faltered, "I thought it was just me, because of my scars." "No, ma'am," Carlos said firmly. "You're just the most visible target. I was there in Afghanistan, Lieutenant. I saw what you did for 18 hours straight, but Preston can't stand the idea of someone like you being celebrated as a hero." Teresa's eyes widened. "You were there?" Carlos nodded. 3rd Battalion Support Team. We all knew who was calling in those airstrikes while taking heavy fire. Preston's been spreading lies about your service, but I know the truth. "As do I," Dr. Chen added. "While the details of your mission remain classified, I've seen enough to recognize that Preston's campaign against you is part of something much larger. He's not just targeting individuals. He's attempting to systematically remove anyone who challenges his vision of military leadership." Teresa absorbed this information, her posture straightening slightly. How many others? "At least 15 documented cases of targeted harassment," Carlos replied, showing her his collected evidence. plus another dozen who've requested transfers to avoid becoming targets. Preston's using his father's influence to create an atmosphere of fear. And it's affecting unit cohesion, Dr. Chen added. Soldiers are afraid to work together, support each other, or challenge inappropriate behavior. The psychological impact is spreading beyond the direct targets. Teresa studied the documentation, her intelligence training allowing her to quickly recognize the patterns. He's not even trying to hide it. He believes he's untouchable. Because so far he has been, Carlos said grimly. But knowing you're not alone in this fight, does that change anything, Lieutenant? For the first time in weeks, a spark of the warrior Carlos remembered from Afghanistan flickered in Teresa's eyes. It changes everything, Sergeant Major. We can't let him succeed in driving good soldiers out of service just because they don't fit his prejudiced vision. The three continued their discussion, sharing information and connecting dots that painted a clear picture of Preston's systematic campaign of harassment. It wasn't just about cruel comments or personal attacks. It was an orchestrated effort to reshape the military's future leadership through intimidation and political influence. Teresa sat at her desk in the intelligence wing, surrounded by stacks of personnel files and transfer requests. Each document told a similar story. Qualified soldiers seeking reassignment, their careers disrupted by Preston's systematic campaign of harassment. Her fingers traced the edges of a particularly troubling report. A decorated combat medic who'd requested a transfer after being told she didn't have the right look for advancement. It's like watching dominoes fall, Dr. Chen said from the doorway, holding a fresh stack of files. Every time someone transfers out, Preston places one of his followers in their position. Teresa nodded, her scarred face reflecting in the computer screen. I've been mapping the pattern. Look at this. She pulled up an organizational chart she'd created. Red dots marked positions where Preston's associates had been placed over the past 6 months. He's not just harassing people, he's strategically removing them to install his own network. Dr. Chen leaned closer, her eyes widening. The medical department, logistics, communications, he's positioning his people in every critical support role. And using his father's influence to fast-track their promotions, Sergeant Major Reyes added, joining them with his own documentation. I've confirmed at least 25 instances where qualified candidates were passed over in favor of Preston's choices. Teresa clicked through several screens, revealing more connections. His father's position on the Armed Services Committee gives him unprecedented access. Every time someone files a complaint against Preston, it gets buried. Meanwhile, his followers file counter-complaints that move straight to the top, creating a paper trail that makes the victims look like troublemakers, Dr. Chen said grimly. Classic manipulation of the system. Teresa pulled up another file, this one showing Preston's social connections. These aren't random cadets he's recruiting. They're all from wealthy families, political connections, old money. He's building a network of privilege. Through the window, they could see Preston holding court with his followers near the parade ground. His voice carried across the distance. The military needs to maintain certain standards. We can't let just anyone rise through the ranks. He's not even trying to hide it anymore, Reyes growled. Yesterday, he told Lieutenant Park that traditional military leadership requires a certain background. Teresa's hands clenched into fists. He's trying to turn the clock back 50 years, creating an officer corps that looks exactly like him. The question is, Dr. Chen said quietly, what are we going to do about it? Teresa stared at her reflection in the computer screen, the scars that had become both her burden and her shield. Fighting back meant exposing herself to even greater retaliation. Preston's father could destroy careers with a single phone call, but staying silent meant watching everything she'd fought for being dismantled by prejudice and privilege. If we move against him, she said slowly, we need absolute proof. Something even his father can't sweep under the rug. I've been documenting everything, Reyes offered. Video, audio, witness statements. But we'd need someone high enough in the chain of command to act on it. Before Teresa could respond, the base-wide announcement system crackled to life. Attention all personnel. 4-star General Catherine Martinez will be conducting a surprise inspection of Fort Braxton, arriving at 0800 hours tomorrow morning. All departments prepare for immediate review. The three exchanged meaningful looks. General Martinez was known for her zero-tolerance policy toward discrimination and her commitment to maintaining diversity in military leadership. More importantly, she answered directly to the Joint Chiefs beyond Senator Blackwood's immediate influence. "This could be our chance," Teresa said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "But if we fail..." "If we fail, Preston's vision becomes reality," Reyes finished, "and everything we've fought for gets erased." Dr. Chen placed a supportive hand on Teresa's shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone. We've got your back." Teresa looked at the organizational chart again, at the spreading network of red dots threatening to overwhelm the screen. Then she thought of all the soldiers who'd been forced out, all the careers derailed, all the talent lost because they didn't fit Preston's narrow vision of what a soldier should look like. "We've got one shot at this," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Let's make it count." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her desk as they began preparing their evidence, knowing that tomorrow would either mark the beginning of Preston's downfall or the end of their own careers. The choice to fight back had been made. Now they just had to survive the consequences. Fort Braxton erupted into frenzied activity at exactly 700 hours. Personnel scurried across the grounds like disturbed ants, polishing every surface and straightening every uniform. The imminent arrival of General Catherine Morrison, known throughout the military as the Iron Lady, had triggered a base-wide scramble for perfection. Preston Blackwood III lounged against a wall in the main administrative building, watching the chaos with an amused smirk. "My father and the general are old golf buddies," he announced to his circle of followers. "This inspection is just a formality." Teresa Torres kept her head down as she walked past them, carrying an armload of intelligence reports. Preston's voice carried deliberately loud. "Some people should make themselves scarce during the inspection. We wouldn't want to give the wrong impression about our standards." His followers laughed on cue, but their amusement died quickly as a staff car pulled up to the building. General Morrison stepped out, her 4 stars glinting in the morning sun. She carried herself with the unmistakable authority of someone who had earned every promotion through merit rather than connections. "Attention!" The call rang out across the courtyard. Personnel snapped to attention as the general approached, her keen eyes missing nothing. Preston stepped forward, chest puffed out. "Cadet Preston Blackwood III, ma'am. My father sends his regards." The general's expression remained neutral. "I'm here to inspect the base, Cadet, not your family connections. Fall in with the others." Teresa tried to slip past unnoticed, but Preston chose that moment to make another pointed comment. "Lieutenant Torres, shouldn't you be hiding in your office? We wouldn't want to frighten the general with your condition." The cruel words hung in the air. Several personnel shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. General Morrison turned slowly, her gaze sharp as a combat knife. "Lieutenant Torres?" she called out. Teresa stopped, turning to face the general. The scars on her face caught the morning light, a roadmap of sacrifice that made some people flinch. But General Morrison's eyes showed recognition, then something deeper: respect. "Phantom?" The general's voice carried clearly across the suddenly silent courtyard. "Is that really you?" The single word, that call sign, fell like a thunderbolt. Personnel who had been averting their eyes now stared openly. Preston's smirk faltered. "Yes, ma'am," Teresa answered quietly. General Morrison crossed the space between them with purposeful strides. "The last time I saw you was at Firebase Echo. You were calling in danger-close airstrikes on your own position while holding off an entire Taliban battalion." The revelation rippled through the assembled personnel. Whispers spread like wildfire. Firebase Echo had been in every military newspaper 3 years ago, a legendary last stand where a single sniper had saved hundreds of lives. "That was you," someone whispered. Preston's face had lost its arrogant confidence. "My father never mentioned—" "Your father wasn't there, Cadet." General Morrison cut him off sharply. He didn't see Lieutenant Torres fight for 18 straight hours with shrapnel in her face. He didn't hear her maintain radio discipline even while the enemy was overrunning her position. He wasn't there when she earned the Medal of Honor that's still classified. Each word landed like a hammer blow. Personnel who had avoided Teresa for months now looked at her with new understanding. The scars on her face were no longer marks of shame, but badges of incredible courage. "I've been reading some interesting reports about Fort Braxton," General Morrison continued, her voice carrying dangerous undertones. "Reports about harassment, discrimination, and attempts to manipulate the promotion system. Reports that somehow keep disappearing from official channels." Preston took an involuntary step backward. "My father is not here," General Morrison finished. "I am. And I'm very interested in hearing Lieutenant Torres's perspective on these matters. After all, someone who held off 300 enemy combatants alone probably has excellent observational skills." The power dynamics in the courtyard had shifted completely. Preston's followers were already edging away from him, while others were moving closer to Teresa, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Now then," General Morrison addressed the assembly, "let's begin this inspection properly. Lieutenant Torres, walk with me. I believe we have much to discuss." Teresa fell in beside the general, standing straight and proud for the first time in months. Behind them, Preston's empire of privilege began to crumble, one follower at a time. General Morrison led Teresa into the base's main conference room, with the rest of the personnel filing in behind them. The room quickly filled to capacity, with even those without direct business finding reasons to attend. Preston stood near the back, his usual confident posture noticeably diminished. 3 years ago, General Morrison began, her voice commanding absolute attention. Firebase Echo faced imminent overrun by Taliban forces. Our intelligence had failed to detect a massive enemy buildup in the surrounding mountains. We had 342 personnel sleeping in their bunks when the attack began. Teresa's hands trembled slightly as the memories surfaced. The general continued. "What happened next became classified at the highest levels, not because we wanted to hide a failure, but because the actions taken were so extraordinary they defied belief." She turned to Teresa. "Lieutenant Torres was operating alone in an observation post 2 kilometers from the main base. She was our eyes that night, and she became our shield." The room was completely silent as General Morrison pulled up satellite imagery on the main screen. Red dots showed enemy positions surrounding the firebase, hundreds of them. At 0200 hours, Lieutenant Torres spotted the first enemy movements. Rather than retreat to safety, she maintained her position. For the next 18 hours, she coordinated precision airstrikes while simultaneously engaging enemy forces with her rifle. Teresa's scarred face tightened as the memories flooded back. The constant crack of her rifle, the radio calls, the explosions drawing closer and closer. "The enemy discovered her position 6 hours in," Morrison continued. "They launched repeated assaults to silence her. Lieutenant Torres held them off while continuing to call in strikes. When she ran low on ammunition, she retrieved rounds from the enemy dead." Several personnel shifted uncomfortably, now seeing the scars in a completely different light. At hour 17, the enemy brought in heavy weapons. Lieutenant Torres's position was becoming untenable, but the firebase still hadn't completed its evacuation. She made a decision that few would have the courage to make. The general's voice carried both admiration and pain. She called in danger-close airstrikes on her own position, not once but 7 times. She remained in the blast zone to ensure accurate targeting, even as shrapnel tore into her face and body. Gasps echoed through the room. Someone whispered, "Dear God." The official report credits Lieutenant Torres with eliminating 78 enemy combatants with direct fire, coordinating strikes that eliminated another 143, and most importantly, giving 342 American personnel time to evacuate safely. Teresa stood rigid, her eyes focused on some distant point as the general spoke. The memories were like physical blows. The heat of the explosions, the taste of blood, the certainty that each breath would be her last. When we finally reached her position, Lieutenant Torres was still conscious, still reporting enemy movements. The medical report documented 47 separate shrapnel wounds, but not a single American life was lost that night. Preston had pressed himself against the back wall, his face ashen. The magnitude of his cruelty, mocking these scars, spreading rumors of cowardice, was crushing him. The Medal of Honor citation remains classified, General Morrison continued. But I want everyone in this room to understand something. Those scars you've been staring at, they're not marks of damage. They're proof of the highest form of courage we recognize in uniform. Teresa finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. I never wanted anyone to know. The nightmares, the memories, it was easier to let people think what they wanted. Easier, yes, the general acknowledged. But Lieutenant Torres, you've been carrying this burden alone for too long. These scars tell a story that every soldier should know. They remind us that true heroism isn't about privilege or appearance. It's about the choices we make when lives are on the line. The room had transformed. Personnel who had avoided Teresa's gaze for months now looked at her with undisguised awe. The scars that had marked her as an outsider now revealed her as something else entirely. A living legend who had walked among them unrecognized. Preston's followers had completely abandoned him, many now looking at him with open disgust. His campaign of harassment against a Medal of Honor recipient would destroy not just his career, but likely his father's carefully constructed political narrative as well. Teresa felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that even combat hadn't prepared her for. But as she looked around the room and saw the changed expressions, the respect and understanding replacing judgment and avoidance, something tight in her chest began to loosen. For the first time in 3 years, she stood at her full height, unashamed of the marks that told her story. General Morrison wasted no time launching a formal investigation into Preston's conduct. The base's legal office buzzed with activity as personnel after personnel came forward with their accounts of harassment. Teresa sat in a quiet interview room, her hands clasped tightly as she recounted the weeks of torment to the investigating officer. He said the intelligence division should keep me hidden where civilians couldn't see the damage, Teresa said quietly, her fingers unconsciously tracing the scars on her face. That was just the beginning. The investigating officer, Major Sarah Chen, typed rapidly on her laptop. And the formal complaints he filed about your appearance? 3 of them. Each one cited Regulation 411 about maintaining professional military appearance. He claimed my scars were... Teresa's voice caught. Were disturbing to other personnel and damaging to unit cohesion. Down the hall, Preston paced in another interview room, his previously immaculate uniform now wrinkled from nervous fidgeting. This is ridiculous, he snapped at his assigned legal counsel. Do you know who my father is? This whole thing will be shut down before dinner. But General Morrison's authority proved stronger than Preston's usual protections. His calls to his father's office went straight to voicemail. His typical allies on base suddenly couldn't remember his name. The investigation gathered momentum with more victims coming forward each hour. Dr. Amanda Chen found Teresa in the base chapel that evening, sitting alone in the dim light. How are you holding up? She asked gently, sliding into the pew beside her. Everyone knows now, Teresa whispered. About Firebase Echo. About the medal. Every time someone looks at me, I'm back there. The explosions, the screams, the blood. She pressed her hands against her temples. I'd gotten so good at being invisible. You survived that night by being incredibly strong, Dr. Chen said. You can survive this too. But this time, you don't have to do it alone. The investigation's momentum hit its first obstacle the next morning. Senator Preston Blackwood II arrived at Fort Braxton in a black SUV, his face thunderous as he stormed into the headquarters building. His voice carried through the closed doors of General Morrison's office. This is a witch hunt, Catherine. My son is being targeted because of his family name. I won't stand for it. General Morrison's response was measured but firm. Your son systematically harassed a Medal of Honor recipient, Senator, and not just her. We have 37 separate complaints documented. This isn't going away. Like hell it isn't. The senator's voice rose. I chair the Armed Services Committee. One phone call and I can freeze promotions across this entire base. Is that what you want? To sacrifice hundreds of careers over some oversensitive complaints? Teresa, waiting outside for her next interview, felt her chest tighten at the senator's words. The old impulse to disappear, to let the powerful have their way, pulled at her. But then she remembered that night at Firebase Echo, how giving up hadn't been an option when lives depended on her. The senator burst out of the office, his face red with fury. He spotted Teresa in the hallway and jabbed a finger at her. "This ends now. Whatever my son said, he apologizes. But if you pursue this, I'll make sure everyone involved regrets it." Teresa stood slowly, her scarred face catching the fluorescent light. The same quiet strength that had kept her fighting through 18 hours of hell steadied her voice. "With respect, Senator, I've already faced worse threats than you, and I didn't back down then either." The senator's threats rippled through the base. Some personnel withdrew their complaints, fearing for their careers. Others doubled down, inspired by Teresa's stand. Preston's desperate attempts to contact his father's other political allies met with unusual silence. No one wanted to challenge General Morrison's authority on a matter involving a Medal of Honor recipient. Dr. Chen found Teresa in her office late that evening, reviewing her original statement. "The senator's pressure is getting to some people," Teresa said quietly. "Maybe I should just..." "Just what?" Dr. Chen asked. "Let them win?" "The Lieutenant Torres I read about in that classified report didn't give up when the odds were impossible. Why start now?" Teresa touched her scars, feeling their familiar texture. "That night I had a clear mission: save the base, stop the enemy, simple. This is different. People's careers are at stake." "Yes," Dr. Chen agreed. "And just like that night, you're fighting for what's right. The only difference is this time you're not alone in the fight." Teresa sat alone in her office, reviewing classified intelligence reports as the evening shadows lengthened across Fort Braxton. The investigation had thrown the base into chaos, with personnel choosing sides and tensions running high. She rubbed her tired eyes, the scars on her face tingling with phantom pain as they often did when she was stressed. The door burst open without warning. Preston Blackwood stormed in, his face twisted with rage, his usually pristine uniform disheveled. Teresa immediately noted his erratic movements, the wild look in his eyes and the way his hands trembled. "You're ruining everything," he snarled, slamming the door behind him. "Years of planning, my whole future, destroyed because you couldn't just stay hidden in your corner like a good little broken soldier." Teresa slowly stood, her combat-trained mind already cataloging potential threats and escape routes. "Cadet Blackwood, you're not authorized to be in this secure area." "Authorized?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I'm a Blackwood. I go where I want, do what I want. And right now, I want you to understand exactly what happens to people who cross me." He advanced toward her desk. Teresa's muscles tensed, muscle memory from years of combat training taking over. She carefully shifted classified documents into a secure drawer without taking her eyes off Preston. "Last chance," she said quietly. "Leave now and this doesn't have to get worse." Preston lunged forward, sweeping his arm across her desk, sending papers and equipment crashing to the floor. "Worse? I'll show you worse. You think those scars look bad now? Wait until I'm done with you." He grabbed for her throat, but Teresa was already moving. Years of close-quarters combat training took over. She deflected his grab with her left arm while simultaneously stepping to the side, using his own momentum to send him stumbling past her. Preston crashed into the filing cabinet, then spun around with an incoherent roar of rage. "You dare touch me? Do you know what my father will do to you?" "Your father isn't here," Teresa replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She maintained her defensive stance, watching his every move. "And you're not in your father's world anymore." He charged again, throwing wild punches that Teresa easily avoided. Her training showed in every movement, efficient, controlled, precise. She blocked another wild swing, then used a simple joint lock to redirect his energy, sending him sprawling across her desk. "Stay down," she ordered, using her command voice. "Security is already on their way." But Preston wasn't listening anymore. His eyes darted around frantically until they locked onto something that made Teresa's blood run cold. Her service pistol, secured in its holster, hanging on the coat rack. Time seemed to slow as Preston lunged for the weapon. Teresa's combat instincts screamed into overdrive. She moved without conscious thought, her body remembering countless hours of weapons retention training. Preston's fingers had just brushed the holster when Teresa's strike caught him in the solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs. She followed with a sweep that took his legs out from under him. The pistol clattered to the floor as Preston went down hard, but desperation gave him strength. He scrambled toward the fallen weapon, his fingers stretching for it. Teresa kicked it under the filing cabinet, well out of reach, then used a control hold to pin Preston face down on the floor. "It's over," she said firmly, maintaining the hold as he struggled beneath her. "The only thing you're doing now is adding assault charges to your record." "You can't do this to me!" Preston screamed, his voice cracking with panic and rage. "I'm a Blackwood. We make the rules. We decide who matters." The office door burst open as military police rushed in, weapons drawn. "Lieutenant Torres," the lead MP called out. "Are you all right?" "Secure, but I need assistance," Teresa replied calmly, never loosening her hold on the still struggling Preston. "The suspect attempted to assault me and tried to access my service weapon. He'll need to be restrained." As the MPs moved in to take control of Preston, Teresa finally allowed herself to feel the tremors running through her body. Not from fear. She'd faced far worse than an entitled cadet with delusions of supremacy. No, she trembled with the realization that for the first time since Firebase Echo, she'd been forced to directly confront violence. And just like that night, she'd proven equal to the challenge. Preston's screams echoed down the hallway as the MPs led him away in handcuffs. "My father will destroy you, all of you. This isn't over." Teresa stood in her disheveled office, carefully retrieving her weapon and securing it properly. She touched her scars, remembering the price she'd paid for courage under fire. Some battles were fought with bullets and bombs, others with the simple act of standing up to those who thought power meant they could hurt others without consequences. She looked at her phone, seeing the notifications already popping up. General Morrison would need to be briefed. There would be statements to make, reports to file. But for now, Teresa allowed herself a moment to breathe, knowing that sometimes the hardest fights weren't on the battlefield, but in standing up to the everyday tyranny of those who believed their privilege put them above the law. The morning after the assault, Teresa stood in Colonel Matthews's office, her hands clasped behind her back as she received the news of her suspension. The morning sun streaming through the windows seemed to mock the darkness of the moment. "I'm sorry, Lieutenant Torres," Colonel Matthews said, unable to meet her eyes. "Orders from above. You're suspended pending a full psychological evaluation. They're citing concerns about your stability following the incident." Teresa's face remained carefully neutral, though her scars seemed to burn. "Sir, Cadet Blackwood attempted to assault me and tried to access my weapon. The security footage has been classified," Matthews interrupted, his discomfort visible. "Senator Blackwood cited national security concerns due to the classified nature of your office." The injustice of it hit Teresa like a physical blow. "They're using my own security clearance against me." "Effective immediately, you're to surrender your credentials and weapon," Matthews continued, his voice heavy with resignation. "You're restricted from base access until the psychological evaluation is complete." As Teresa removed her badge, she noticed her hands weren't shaking. She'd faced worse odds at Firebase Echo, but somehow this felt more devastating, watching corruption destroy everything she'd fought to protect. Outside the office, whispers followed her as she cleaned out her desk. Preston's supporters looked smug, while others avoided eye contact, afraid of being associated with her downfall. The few who dared show support were quickly noted by Preston's network of influence. At home, Teresa paced her small apartment feeling caged. Her phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen. "Senator Blackwood's pushing for immediate psychiatric commitment. Claims PTSD makes you a danger. Morrison fighting back. Stay strong." The television news painted a carefully crafted narrative. "Questions arise about decorated officers' stability," the headlines read. "Senator calls for review of combat veterans in sensitive positions." They showed Preston's official photo, clean-cut, privileged, the perfect military son. Next to it, they used Teresa's worst photo, highlighting her scars, making her look unstable. Sergeant Major Reyes visited that evening, bringing dinner and updates. "They're trying to bury this fast," he said, his usual jovial manner replaced by controlled anger. "Senator Blackwood's calling in every favor, threatening careers. Half the base leadership's running scared. And Preston? Teresa asked, though she already knew the answer. Confined to quarters, officially. Unofficially, his father's got him staying at the family estate while they handle things. Reyes's fist tightened around his coffee cup. They're spinning it as you having a PTSD episode, claiming Preston was just checking on your welfare when you snapped. Teresa touched her scars, remembering the real cost of service. They're using my sacrifice against me. General Morrison's not backing down, Reyes assured her. She's calling in her own favors, building support. The formal hearing's scheduled for next week. Later that night, Teresa watched Senator Blackwood on the news, his practiced concern masking barely concealed triumph. Our military heroes deserve our support and proper care, he said smoothly. This unfortunate incident highlights the need for better mental health screening. As chair of the Armed Services Committee, I'm launching a full review. The days crawled by, Teresa's phone filled with messages from Dr. Chen and Reyes, updating her on the behind-the-scenes battle. General Morrison was gathering allies, but Senator Blackwood's influence ran deep. Every person who spoke up for Teresa found their career suddenly under scrutiny. 5 days into her suspension, Teresa received the psychological evaluation appointment. The evaluator's name made her heart sink. Dr. Harrison Phillips, known for his connections to the Blackwood Family Foundation. They're not even trying to hide the corruption anymore, she told Dr. Chen during their secure video call. They know they can operate in the open. That's their weakness, Dr. Chen replied. Morrison's gathering evidence of their interference. The more blatant they are, the more ammunition they give us. But watching the system protect Preston while destroying her career felt like a deeper wound than any she'd received in combat. Her scars had been earned saving lives. Now they were being used to paint her as unstable, dangerous, unfit for duty. The formal hearing loomed closer. Senator Blackwood's influence seemed unstoppable. Base personnel who'd witnessed Preston's months of harassment suddenly couldn't recall specific incidents. Security footage disappeared. Records were altered. This is what we're really fighting, General Morrison told Teresa during a private meeting at her home. Not just Preston's actions, but a system that lets privilege corrupt the very principles we serve. They think their power makes them untouchable. Teresa stood at her window that night watching storm clouds gather over Fort Braxton. She'd held the line alone before, calling in danger close strikes while Taliban forces tried to overrun her position. She'd earned her scars protecting others. Now she faced a different kind of battle, one where the enemy wore friendly uniforms and wielded paperwork instead of weapons. The hearing would determine more than just her career. It would decide whether justice could triumph over corruption, whether sacrifice and honor still meant something in a system increasingly controlled by privilege and political power. As lightning illuminated the base in the distance, Teresa touched her scars and made a silent promise. She'd survived 18 hours alone against overwhelming odds. She could survive this too. Some fights were worth any cost. The formal hearing room buzzed with tension as Teresa sat straight-backed in her dress uniform, her scarred face held high. The board members, a mix of senior officers and civilian oversight, settled into their positions behind the long mahogany table. Senator Blackwood sat in the front row, his expensive suit and confident smirk suggesting he still believed money and influence would prevail. General Morrison strode into the room, her 4 stars gleaming. She carried a thick folder marked with multiple classified stamps. The room fell silent as she took her position. This board is now in session, announced Colonel Richards, the senior member. We're here to review the suspension of Lieutenant Teresa Torres and allegations of misconduct by Cadet Preston Blackwood III. Senator Blackwood's attorney stood. We move to dismiss these proceedings. Lieutenant Torres's documented psychological instability. Objection. General Morrison's voice cut through the room like steel. Before we continue, I'm exercising my authority to declassify portions of Lieutenant Torres's service record. She opened the folder. 3 years ago at Firebase Echo, Lieutenant Torres, then operating under the call sign Phantom, single-handedly prevented the fall of a forward operating base housing 300 personnel. The room stilled. Morrison continued. For 18 hours, she maintained her sniper position despite sustaining severe injuries. When Taliban forces threatened to overrun the base, she called in danger-close airstrikes on her own position, choosing to risk her life rather than abandon her post. She placed photographs on the display screen, satellite imagery, after-action reports, medical records. The scars that Cadet Blackwood so cruelly mocked, they came from shrapnel when Lieutenant Torres remained in the blast zone to ensure mission success. Her actions saved hundreds of lives. Senator Blackwood shifted uncomfortably as Morrison produced more documents. This Medal of Honor citation was classified to protect ongoing operations. But now we'll hear the truth about the woman your son targeted for systematic harassment. Preston, sitting with his own attorneys, had lost his arrogant expression. Morrison turned to address the board directly. What followed was a coordinated campaign of harassment, documented by multiple witnesses who were previously afraid to speak due to political pressure. Dr. Chen stepped forward, carrying her own files. I have signed statements from 17 service members detailing Cadet Blackwood's pattern of targeting those he deemed undesirable. When they reported his behavior, his father's influence was used to silence them. Sergeant Major Reyes presented security footage that had been lost, clear evidence of Preston's escalating harassment. Email records showed Senator Blackwood's staff pressuring base leadership to bury complaints. The final blow came when Morrison played the security footage from Teresa's office. The board watched in silence as Preston attacked her, his true nature exposed as he drew a weapon on a Medal of Honor recipient. This isn't just about one cadet's behavior, Morrison declared. This is about systemic corruption that allows privilege to override merit, that values political connections over courage and sacrifice. Senator Blackwood's carefully crafted narrative crumbled as witness after witness came forward. Base personnel, no longer afraid, testified about Preston's harassment campaign and his father's interference. The psychological evaluation was exposed as a sham, with Dr. Phillips admitting under oath that he'd been pressured to find Teresa unfit. Teresa sat quietly through it all, her posture perfect, her expression composed. But inside, something was shifting. Each revelation felt like another weight lifting from her shoulders. The board's deliberation was brief. Colonel Richards delivered their findings. Cadet Preston Blackwood III, you are hereby recommended for court-martial on charges of assault, conduct unbecoming, and attempted access of classified materials. This board recommends immediate dishonorable discharge. He turned to Teresa. Lieutenant Torres, you are fully reinstated with our sincere apologies. Furthermore, in recognition of your exemplary service, this board endorses your promotion to major, effective immediately. Senator Blackwood stormed out as reporters swarmed the hallway, cameras flashing. By evening, news channels were running stories about Senate ethics investigations into his abuse of power. After the hearing, Teresa found herself in the base courtyard with Dr. Chen. The psychiatrist's gentle presence had been a constant support through the investigation. How do you feel? Amanda asked softly. Teresa touched her scars, but for the first time, they didn't burn with shame. Like I can breathe again, she said. Like I don't have to hide anymore. Amanda stepped closer. You never had to hide. Your scars tell a story of courage, not weakness. Their eyes met, and Teresa felt another wall crumbling, the one she'd built around her heart. Amanda's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. I'd like to take you to dinner, Amanda said. Not as your doctor, I'm transferring your care to Dr. Matthews, just as me. Teresa smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. I'd like that. Later in her quarters, Teresa stood before her mirror. The scars were still there, marking her face with their familiar pattern. But now she saw them differently, not as disfigurements, but as medals etched in flesh, proof of courage and sacrifice. She saw a hero looking back at her, someone who had held the line not once but twice, first against physical enemies, then against corruption that threatened the values she'd sworn to defend. For the first time since Firebase Echo, she felt proud of the woman in the mirror. Her phone buzzed with a message from General Morrison. Report Monday to begin training our next generation of special operations units. They need to learn from the best. Teresa straightened her uniform, her new major's oak leaves gleaming. She was ready for this new chapter, not as a victim, but as a warrior who had earned every scar and every victory. I believe stories like this find us for a reason. If this one touched you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day, and tomorrow's might be the one your heart's been waiting for.